Welcome to Missed Marks. I'm Billy Joe, and I'm here to talk to you today about the new movie Sinners from director Ryan Coogler. Now, the first question you got to ask is, what is Sinners? Well, if you've seen the trailer, you can get a pretty good description of what you're getting into. However, with that being said, the trailer is equally as accurate as it is inaccurate in what kind of experience you're going to be looking forward to. Now, why I say that is the trailer that I saw was very much action-packed, suspenseful, go, go, go. Now, I need you to understand that you will get that in this movie. They didn't have anything in the trailer that's not in the movie. Again, at least the trailer that I saw. However, with that being said, what you may not know going into it is that there is actually a very deep story that requires quite a bit of setup. Every bit of that setup is very enjoyable. However, as I am somebody that believes that expectations are the key to enjoyment, you need to go into this knowing that you're not going to get a 2 hour of dark, deep action movie. You're going to get about an hour and some change of setup, storytelling, really great quality acting from everybody involved, particularly Michael B. Jordan, and making his cinematic debut, Michael A. Jordan. Now, you do have somewhat of a third main character that is prominently featured throughout the movie, and that is played by making his actual cinematic debut, Miles Caton. And I apologize if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly, as this is his cinematic debut. I haven't seen any interviews that will confirm the pronunciation of that last name. But what you do need to know is that you will be learning the pronunciation, as I will, because this guy is going to be around for a long time. He does a stellar job in this film, as does Michael B. and A. Jordan, but you've come to expect that from him. Going back to setting expectations properly. Now, this movie to me was a flawless movie. I absolutely loved every moment of it. I had good expectations for the film, and even though I didn't know about the extensive setup prior to the action scenes, I had no problem with that. I much more greatly appreciate the slow burn and build up, as opposed to just the constant no-purpose action and dramatic influence. So we really get a great instance of building up the action and getting you to kind of wet your palate first before you dump right into the buffet of blood and gore. One thing that you do need to set your expectations appropriately is that this movie is set in the 1930s. Now, I don't need to be here to give anybody a history lesson on the state of Southern America, America as a whole, but Southern America especially. If you do not know about the racial tensions in 1930s Southern America, then I assume you probably shouldn't be watching this movie because you probably haven't finished grade school. But there are historically accurate portrayals of the racial tensions in Southern America between white and African Americans. So if this is something that the topic of that and the depiction of that is going to make you uncomfortable, you may not enjoy this movie. Now, the reality is that's what it was. That is exactly how it was. This is not current day. This is 1930s. There was a lot of hatred going around. It was unnecessary. It was unwarranted. It was unright, but it did happen. So if you cannot conform yourself to be comfortable with that depiction, you might want to skip this film, because it is a very accurate part and portrayal of what was going on back then, and unfortunately, to some extent, still today. Now that you've got your expectations set properly, that you're going to understand that this is a movie that may make you a little uncomfortable based on the historically accurate portrayal of the time period, as well as understanding that there's going to be a little bit of a build-up, I also want to let you know that while this movie doesn't quite hit the gas pedal immediately, when it does, you have no shortage of it, and you really are not left wanting more. You get the perfect amount. It's not too little, not too much. It's just enough, and the special effects used for the action scenes with the vampires, phenomenal. Some of the best I've ever seen. Now, this movie is billed as a horror movie. I do think that's a little bit inaccurate. The only real aspects of a horror film that you'll find are there within the gory special effects makeup. So if you have somebody that's okay with violence and gore and a little bit of blood, but not so much okay with the thrills and scares of a more intimidating horror film, you may be able to bring them to this movie, and they'd be alright with it. But if you have somebody that does get a little grossed out by gratuitous amounts of blood, gore, and kind of skin-tearing sort of thing, you might want to leave them at home for this one. So it's not necessarily a scary movie as much as it is a visually intimidating movie. There's a lot of really great special effects going on, and it does look quite real. I mentioned that this is a vampire film. That is true. And again, you're not going to see any elements of that in the first half of the movie. Now, I say first half of the movie. That's a generous estimation, but it is about a half of the movie that's going to go through with no real implication of the vampires outside of the opening scene. But it is a vampire movie, and therefore one thing has to be called into question. Every movie that you've seen do vampires has done them slightly differently. Some take a more generous, creative approach. Some take a more historically, quote-unquote, accurate approach. This movie does abide by the traditional vampire lore, so if you're somebody like me that does get a little iffy when they start to change things or manipulate it to be a little bit more convenient to the story, you will enjoy the fact that this movie is 100% accurate to a lot of the historic portrayals that you've seen of vampires over the years. They found a way to bind the story around those traditional rules, so you will feel well at home with your existing knowledge of vampire rules. One of the things that I find that the movie does really well is incorporates music into the story. It's not a musical by any stretch of the imagination, so if you're not somebody that's a fan of musicals, you don't have to worry about going into this disliking that. But if you do enjoy a good tune, you'll find no shortage in this film. There's a multitude of different genres, styles, and portrayals of the music, including one scene in particular that I won't give any spoilers for, but does a great job at blending in multiple different styles of music into one really beautifully shot scene. Honestly, I think this might be my favorite scene of the entire movie, as well as my favorite scene of any movie that I've seen this year. It was very well shot. Speaking of the cinematography, I want to take a moment to really go into the detail. It feels like every scene is very purposefully shot. There's nothing that really feels forced, nothing that feels left out, no perspective that seems unnecessary. Every real detail feels at home here. Now, if you're like me and you've seen the movie From Dusk Till Dawn, then you will be no stranger to the idea of having a movie that starts out completely unrelated to vampires, only for them to arrive in a confined area where the vampire attack is all around them. That is Sinners, that is From Dusk Till Dawn. The difference between the two is that Sinners takes a much more serious approach to the storytelling. Now, From Dusk Till Dawn does start off with a bit more of that serious approach, however, it quickly loses it and goes into the full-on comedic approach with the over-the-top scenes, and the story of the movie really gets lost fast. That is not the case with Sinners. This movie continues the story throughout, and actually even in the action scenes is incorporating the character development and the stories that you've come to appreciate with the film. So that's something that I think that From Dusk Till Dawn really lacked. And that's just me. That's my personal preference. I felt like From Dusk Till Dawn missed the mark a little bit in that it abandoned the more functional, serious plotline for the sake of the over-the-top action scenes. Whereas in Sinners, that plotline continues through while they're filming the action scenes. The scenes are so revolving around the stories that you have already encountered in the movie. It is because of all of these things that I found myself asking the question, is this the best vampire movie that I've ever seen? Well, I don't want to be too hasty and say that it is. However, I did leave the theater feeling like this was a top 3 vampire movie that I've ever seen. This is easily in contention for my favorite movie of the year. I know it was early, but I just see this one holding on for the long run. I really didn't want to abuse the privilege of the Bullseye ranking, and I actually hate that I'm giving one out this early, but I've been left with no choice. The acting is stellar. The score is fantastic. The action was great. The story was there. The effects were perfect. The music was just so incredible throughout. I found myself tapping my foot throughout the whole movie. There's not a single thing that I could find to correct this movie on. It does everything in spades, and there's nothing I would change about it. And for that, I've been left with no choice but to award this movie the first ever Bullseye rating for Missed Marks. Hopefully this video will help you set your expectations appropriately, understand exactly what it is you're getting into, and help prevent and mitigate any disappointment that you may face. Using this, I hope that you will determine early on if you might leave the theater feeling like a little bit of a missed mark, or if maybe, just maybe, this one's going to hit the bullseye for you too. Let me know in the comments what you think. Did you feel that this movie hit the mark for you, or did you leave the theater feeling like maybe your expectations weren't right for this movie and you went in thinking it was going to be something that you didn't get? Let me know. I'd love to hear from you. And let me know what you think we should watch next. Thank you.